Imagine you're in a coding interview or a system design interview, and the interviewer has asked you a particularly tricky problem. Pretty sure that you won't be able to answer this question or crack that problem to get to the solution. Does this mean that all is lost? Far from it, my friend. One key idea is to reframe in your mind that a coding interview or a system design interview is rarely about you providing the correct solution. Most interviews are about checking your problem-solving skills. Given a problem, how do you go about getting to the solution? It's all about the journey, not the destination. Most good interviewers don't care about the final answer itself. Even if you provide a perfectly accurate answer to a problem, what they find more interesting is how you got there. They want to know if you're capable of getting to that final solution for similar problems. They want to evaluate your problem-solving skills. So in this video, I'm going to show you 5 key strategies that can help you shine in these situations, even if the solution seems out of reach, especially if the solution seems out of reach. These techniques that I will share you are not only for coding interviews, they can work for system design interviews or any other interview question where the solution is not very clear at first glance. Right? I'm not going to give you generic tips like say your thoughts out loud or ask clarifying questions. There are hundreds of videos which cover that. No, these tips are going to go beyond the generic and they're really going to make you stand out. Because I will tell you what I've noticed most good problem solvers do in my many years of experience, right? These are strategies that some excellent problem solvers naturally apply when they're solving problems. And after watching this video, you will be able to apply the same techniques, not only to showcase your skills in an interview, but also to just level up your problem solving skills overall. Starting with strategy number 1, embrace your failures. This is one of those counterintuitive things that we normally tend to do the opposite of. However, doing this one thing is going to make you stand out from a whole lot of other interviewees. When you're doing coding interviews or system design interviews, you're guaranteed to make mistakes during the interview. It's just a part of tackling the problem. Sometimes you end up veering towards the wrong path and you have to correct yourself, right? The common instinctual reaction that we have when that happens is to basically move away from the mistake, or even worse, to hide the mistake from others, especially in an interview scenario, right? But I want to tell you something very important today. Failing during a problem-solving exercise can be one of the best ways to showcase your abilities as a problem solver. Doesn't make sense? Well, here's how it works. When we make a mistake, we realize that those mistakes are not getting us anywhere near the solution. It's an opportunity for you to shine. Here's what I recommend you do. First, explicitly call out that you have made a mistake. Just call it out clearly. Say, I'm sure I've made a mistake here, right? Not in an apologetic way, not in a, oops, I messed up, I'm sorry kind of a way. Just a factual report acknowledging the mistake without any judgment or shame. It's just a natural part of problem solving. And then you pause and try to figure out what exactly the mistake was and where exactly it happened. There's an opportunity to demonstrate what I call strategic regression. This is where you decide to go back a few steps in your problem solving journey. You look at the point where things started going downhill and then you regress from that point onwards. Now, this might seem like a very simple thing to do, but it's actually not. Most people don't have the courage to even admit that they made a mistake in the interview, let alone go back a few steps in their thought process. But when you do this in front of the interviewer, it demonstrates 2 key skills. First, it demonstrates that you have strong self-awareness and you're capable of identifying when things aren't working out for you. And secondly, you're not afraid to cut your losses, admit mistakes, and move on from them, right? This is very important, and many people lack the skill, and this can be crucial in real-world problem solving. So don't shy away from admitting when things aren't working out for you during an interview question, right? Instead, take advantage of that situation to demonstrate your ability to acknowledge and regress and then move forward with a new approach. It shows the interviewer that you have excellent self-awareness skills, which is always a good thing, right? So much that you'd end up hoping you make a mistake in the interview so that you can demonstrate this behavior. I'm joking, of course. Don't intentionally make mistakes in the interview. But when it happens, and of course it often happens in an interview, you have a good strategy to convert that failure into a win. Strategy number 2, work backwards from the ideal solution. Here's another one of those counterintuitive things that makes so much sense when you understand how it works. Normally, we start with a problem statement and we try to reach an answer for it, right? And often I find candidates not sure where to start. There are so many decisions to be made and you're not quite sure where to begin with. What if I told you that you could completely abandon this need to cleverly pick the right option and instead get to exactly what you need in one shot? Well, you work the other way, right? Have the problem guide you. When faced with a problem, think about the ideal state or solution. Something like, how do we know when we are done, right? What is the success criteria? Find that solution point and then work backwards from that point towards what needs to be achieved in order to reach that ideal state or condition. I'll give you an example. Let's say in your interview, you're asked to design and implement a feature for a ride-sharing app that matches passengers to the nearest available driver. Typically, you might start by considering what information you need. Okay, you need driver information, you need map information, passenger information, and then you build a data structure for each. And then you think about how to use the data structure to track the location of drivers and passengers and move on to writing the algorithm that finds the nearest driver for each passenger request. Now, what you're doing here is bottom-up thinking. You're trying to get the basic elements in place and build on top of them to eventually get to the final expected state. Now, what if instead of this approach, you start by asking yourself, how do we know when a rider has been matched with the nearest available driver? What does it mean for the system when this ideal state is achieved? Suppose you ask the interviewer these questions. Suppose their response would be, well, the distance between the passenger and the nearest available rider is less than, say, X miles. Great. Now, instead of building up from the scratch using bottom-up thinking, you can work backwards from this ideal state by asking yourself, what needs to happen for that condition to be true? For example, you realize that you need to be able to identify drivers within X miles, right? So what needs to happen for that to be possible? Well, in order to calculate the distance between the passenger and the driver, your system will need to track both their locations on an ongoing basis. This means that the driver's device must regularly send location updates to the server and receive periodic pings from nearby passengers who are requesting rides. So basically the idea is when you work backwards like this, it becomes very clear what data structures and algorithms you need to solve your goal. And when you discuss these details with your interviewer, they'll get a good sense of how you understand the problem domain and you can design solutions that meet the specific requirements, right? This type of top-down thinking is very, very powerful because it allows you to demonstrate not just your technical expertise, but also your ability to think strategically about complex problems. I'm a big fan of bottom-up when it comes to learning, right? When I learn, I always start from the basics and build up. But when it comes to problem solving, there's a lot of benefit in looking at the ideal state, the ideal solution, and then thinking down to where you need to start to get to that ideal state. Strategy number 3, lean into the 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle. Pareto principle, commonly known as 80-20 rule, states that roughly 80% of the effect comes from 20% of the causes. This means that in any situation, there's a small subset of factors or inputs which have like a disproportionate impact on the outcome. So when you apply this principle to problem solving, it suggests that by focusing your effort on these few critical areas, you can often achieve much better results than trying to optimize everything equally. This is especially true in interviews where there are time constraints. It makes it impossible to cover every possible angle of a complex problem. Instead of focusing on everything, which is really not possible in an hour, you focus on identifying the most important aspects and addressing them first. Why is this rule applicable for problem solving in interviews? You see, the interview problem solving scenario is kind of a special and almost unusual scenario because on the one hand, the interviewer is trying to examine how good you are at solving real life problems. But at the same time, you're not supposed to provide real life solutions, right? Because guess what? You'll be writing complex code and building large designs, and you're supposed to finish that in an hour. So you're telling me that you can't completely design Uber in 1 hour and you call yourself a software engineer? Well, you get the idea. The point is that interviewers don't expect you to build complete solutions and perfect solutions. They want to check your problem solving skills and how quickly and efficiently you approach that problem. As you can imagine, you're evaluated on what part of the problem you focus on. Like system design interviews, right? They start out being intentionally high level and intentionally vague. This happens because the interviewer is likely gauging where you will go from the problem, right? From that vague problem. What areas will you pick to explore first? And this is where focusing on the most critical aspects of problems can really help you stand out, right? By identifying what matters most, you demonstrate clear thinking and strategic prioritization, right? Two crucial skills for any successful software engineer or system designer. Now, the obvious question is, how do you identify this core important 20% to start with that can cause the 80% of the impact? Well, one way to identify what matters most is by pretty much asking the interviewer, right? This is especially true in system design interviews. You can straight up say exactly this. Okay, this is a huge system that we're designing in this interview, and we obviously cannot complete the whole design in an hour. So let's apply the Pareto principle and identify the 20% core of the system that gives us the most mileage. You can literally ask the interviewer this, and then you list out what you think is the most important part and ask the interviewer if they agree, right? After you got the overall outline of the system, another technique that you can apply is to look for bottlenecks or critical points in your design, right? They're usually places where failures can cause cascading effects throughout the rest of the system. Again, 80-20, right? Addressing those key 20% areas first ensures that your overall solution remains stable even under high roll. So basically lean into this role during interviews and you'll find yourself solving problems with greater efficiency and greater effectiveness while also demonstrating problem-solving skills, which is very valuable for your potential employers. Strategy number 4, embracing constraints as creative catalysts. There's this quote, which I think is attributed to Henry Kissinger, which goes something like, "Nothing clears the mind better than the absence of alternatives." There are actually a lot of philosophers, existential philosophers, who call freedom a curse, not a benefit. I don't know about life in general, but it certainly applies to interviews. When you're trying to answer a question at a high-level problem in a technical design, even when you know what to build, there are a lot of decisions to be made about how to build, right? What design pattern should you choose? What data structures would be most efficient? How do we ensure scalability and reliability as the system grows over time? With so many options available, it's kind of easy to become overwhelmed and end up wasting valuable time kind of spinning your wheels instead of solving the problem at hand, especially in an interview when you have a high pressure, limited time situation. Now, how do you avoid this trap? You avoid the trap by seeking constraints and non-functional requirements. Ask the interviewer and establish more constraints and requirements, not less. I know this sounds crazy, but hear me out. In a way, this is very similar to the previous strategy. Using the Pareto principle strategy, you're picking the most important parts of the system you will design in the interview. Using constraints, you will focus on the most important non-functional requirements you need to consider for the system during the interview, right? Constraints can be incredibly powerful tools to kind of clarify your thinking. They limit what options are available to you, so you don't have to waste a lot of time considering every possible approach. Instead, it forces you to focus on the most important aspect of a problem and finding creative ways to solve them with those parameters. So for example, an interview asks you to design a system for real-time data processing, right? Let's say they want high throughput requirements. Don't just jump into designing the system without asking for the specifics. Some specifics could be things like, what is the expected message sizes? What's the maximum latency tolerance? Or whether messages need to be processed in order. These details will help you guide your design decisions. Now, you might ask the interviewer, for example, do you want messages to be received in order or not? And suppose the interviewer says, either is fine. That's actually bad for you because now you have the freedom and more variables to consider in your design. In this case, just impose a constraint and say, okay, I'm going to assume that messages needs to be received in order. Now you've imposed the constraints, and oddly enough, it frees up your decision making, all right? So when faced with like an open-ended problem during an interview, start by asking for constraints and asking for non-functional requirements. So by doing this, you limit the number of variables at play, which allows you to focus more on being creative and solving the limited scope problem rather than being stuck in what's called analysis paralysis, right? You're paralyzed because you don't know what to choose. Strategy number 5, it's a what-if scenario exploration. This last strategy is an interesting one, and it goes beyond just problem solving during interviews. It also applies to real-world problems as well. This involves asking questions about the hypothetical situations that might arise in order to better understand the context of the problem and identify potential pitfalls and opportunities for improvement. One common thing that interviewers do is identify potential flaws in your system design or program, right? After you're done, they try and identify faults and they see how you handle it. again, we're not looking to build full systems and production-ready code in 1 hour. So there'll obviously be gaps or flaws. So any interviewer would pick one of these flaws and either hint at it or they're going to ask you directly. Now consider this. What if you do this instead? Suppose you've built an application and you're not sure how it handles high load. You ask out loud, I want to explore what happens to the system when there is suddenly some high load, right? When you're writing code, you ask, what if this edge case is provided as input to the code? So the beauty of this approach is even if your system does not handle that high load or it does not handle the edge cases, just acknowledging it makes it very clear that you're thinking about these what if scenarios, and that'll earn you points, right? How cool is that? Now, from here, you can see the interviewer's reaction. They will either go, well, that's an interesting angle, let's explore it, or they will say, oh, don't worry about it. In which case, you earn points for just bringing it up and you don't have to deal with it again. You don't have to solve that problem again. You can move on to something else and whatever the interviewer finds interesting. So by asking these what if questions, you're showing that you have the ability to anticipate issues before they become problems, right? These questions help you build rapport with the interviewer. It shows that you're thinking about the problem, that you care about the problem, and rather than finding the best solution possible, you're exploring multiple angles and scenarios and then settling on one final approach, which is very, very important. Now, there are a couple of important things that you should know when applying these techniques. First of all, these 5 strategies are not only useful for technical interviews, they can also be applied to real-world problems as well. But you should remember that these techniques aren't meant to replace good old-fashioned problem-solving skills. You can't fake your way into a job by doing these. Instead, they enhance your chances by giving you additional tools, right? Other candidates might have solved the problem as well, but you stand out when you apply these tools and showcase your skills in a much better way. And secondly, remember that interviews are not just about answering questions, but about also asking good ones. Interviewers appreciate when candidates show curiosity, initiative, and critical thinking skills by posing good questions to them. In this video, I show you what are some really good questions that both impress the interviewer and also give you super useful insights into the company that you're interested in. Go check that out.